It was a night like any other, and my dad had decided it was time to celebrate. My brother had just finished another school year, and I had earned a place at university, so we were the perfect reason to go out for dinner. To be honest, a burger joint wasn't my first choice, but when you're the older sister, you have to be a bit of an adult and put your preferences aside. Joshua, my younger brother, was very excited, convinced that a hamburger was the solution to all problems. My mom, on the other hand, was more caught up in her cell phone than in what was going on around us. Arriving at the restaurant at around 8 o'clock, we went in and were given a refreshing welcome by the air conditioning, something we really appreciated after having sweated in the suffocating heat outside. But as I looked around, I realized that the place was almost empty. There were only a couple of families and a group of friends laughing in a corner. The good thing about that was that there was plenty of free space and we could choose, so we chose a table by the window. And while Dad and I went to order, everything seemed to be going well, until I saw him behind the counter. It was my ex, Samuel, dressed in the restaurant uniform and wearing a ridiculous hat that barely covered his unkempt hair. His expression was friendly, almost silly, as if he were the kind of person who couldn't hurt a fly, but I knew the truth. The reason I broke up with him was because I realized he was a horrible person and potentially dangerous to me and to society itself. At first I thought he was harmless, like those kids who seemed to be a bit troubled and misunderstood. But after a while I realized he was a real monster. Physically, he wasn't threatening, but there was a dark side to his personality. He was manipulative, poisonous, and had an excessive anger bubbling just below the surface. I avoided looking him in the eye, but he recognized me instantly and addressed me as if nothing had happened between us. "Hi, Sophia. You look great," he said in such a casual tone that it gave me chills. It was as if he wasn't the same guy who had trapped me in his house and threatened my life the day I decided to break up with him. He had stalked me through social networks, and that morning, when I escaped through the window, I swore I would never cross paths with him again in my lifetime. But there he was. I wanted to shout at him, to ask him how he dared to talk to me so calmly, but I knew his game. If I got angry, I would be the villain of the story, and he would only be seen as the victim. With that in mind, I decided to ignore him and hurry up with my order. When I returned to the table with the tray, my heart was beating fast, faster than I wanted to admit. He hadn't said anything strange, but seeing him again made me too uneasy. As we sat down to eat, Samuel passed by our table several times, always with a smile that seemed a little bigger than necessary, but only I noticed it. My mom was too focused on her phone to notice anything strange, and Dad was absorbed in his burger, and meanwhile, Samuel kept looking at me, and there was an unsettling anticipation in his expression, as if he were waiting for my reaction. I wanted to run out of there. I had barely taken a couple of bites when I felt something strange. A crunch. A sound that definitely didn't belong in a hamburger. Instinctively, I opened the bun to see what was inside, and what I saw left me paralyzed. Between the cheese and the meat, there were crushed parts of cockroaches. Their legs were stuck to the sauce, and a dark liquid was dripping from the remains. "What the hell?" I muttered in horror, and my throat closed with a snap. I got up from my seat and dropped the burger on the tray, filled with disgust and revulsion, and although I wanted to throw up, my nerves prevented me. I looked at Dad, who had noticed what was on my tray, and suddenly his expression quickly changed from surprise to an anger I had rarely seen in him. "What the hell is this?" he exclaimed, taking the burger and heading for the counter, leaving my mom and Joshua with confused looks on their faces. I saw my dad point to the burger as if it were evidence at a crime scene. The employees looked stunned, but suddenly there was Samuel, coming out of the kitchen with a carefully rehearsed attitude, as if he were prepared for anything. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how this could have happened. Let me get the manager, he said, but I knew he wouldn't go looking for anyone. As he slipped through the kitchen, a chill ran through my body, and when I could finally breathe a little, I shouted, "When the manager comes, I'll make a big fuss. I won't let this lie." "Are you okay, Sophia?" Dad asked, and I replied, "No, this was intentional. This is Samuel, my ex." It was at that moment that Samuel returned, but he wasn't with the manager. He was holding the hamburger in his hand, but his smile was no longer that of a friendly guy. Something on his face made me feel uncomfortable, as if his intentions had darkened even more. I knew he was about to do something bad. Without warning, Samuel jumped over the counter, and in the blink of an eye was standing in front of me. My body seemed to freeze as he approached, and in the blink of an eye his hand was on my arm with excessive force. Then he ambushed me with the hamburger and began to press it against my face very roughly. At that moment, the nauseating smell hit me. It was a combination of decomposing meat, rotten eggs, and a chemical aroma that I will never forget. When the hamburger touched my lips, I felt the legs of the shredded cockroach enter my mouth. I tried to pull away, but he was stronger, and with his free hand he grabbed my jaw, forcing me to open my mouth, while the crumbs and pieces of hamburger began to fall apart, spreading a viscous mixture over my face and mouth. The bread crumbled as a strange liquid, which I couldn't identify, slid down my cheeks, and I felt something fall on my tongue. That metallic taste made me feel like I was going to vomit instantly. But as I started to retch, Samuel tightened his grip even more, chuckling to himself as he forced me to swallow fragments of that disgustingness. I felt more than just the cockroaches. There were pieces of decomposing meat and a sticky liquid that tasted extremely disgusting. My body struggled to free itself, but he remained firm. I tried to scream, but the sound was drowned out as the pieces kept going into my mouth. I thought that a long time had passed since he attacked me, and I wondered why nobody did anything, but then reality hit me like a bucket of cold water. All this had happened in the blink of an eye, maybe in just 2 or 3 seconds, until finally, my dad shook himself out of his confusion and reacted. He lunged at Samuel, grabbing him by the t-shirt and pushing him back, causing him to fall heavily to the floor, but he was still holding the hamburger in his hand. Suddenly, he got up quickly with his eyes wide open, alternating his gaze between my dad and me. By that time, the restaurant had already turned into chaos, with customers screaming and employees trying to break up the fight. It was then that I noticed something that my dad didn't see. Sam had a knife in his hand. "Dad, he's got a knife!" I screamed in desperation, but before my dad could react, Samuel lunged at him to stab him. That moment happened in slow motion for me, and I felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest as I watched the edge of the knife approach my dad's body. However, at the last second, a burly employee appeared just in time and punched Samuel in the face so brutally that he flew several meters before falling to the ground unconscious, with the squashed hamburger still in his hand. The police arrived shortly afterwards and took Samuel away in handcuffs. He was crying and apologizing, begging them not to take him away, saying he didn't know what had happened to him. I didn't believe a word he said. Since that day, every time I think of hamburgers, I can taste and feel the texture of that damn food in my mouth, as if the cockroach's legs were sliding across my lips again, accompanied by the stench of rot. I completely lost my appetite. As for Sam, he has a restraining order now, but I don't understand why I didn't do it the very moment I left his house that day. Although, to be honest, I'm not sure how much help it would be. All I can really do is stay away from that psychopath, and if I ever see him again, I pray he won't recognize me. All this happened at the beginning of the 90s, when I was 9 years old, so I was just a child. My parents decided to take me to a fast food restaurant that had opened on the outskirts of our town and had become very popular lately. It was Saturday night, and we were celebrating my dad getting a new job. Although, to be honest, I didn't care so much about my dad's job as I did the fact that he promised to buy me a combo with the toy, which were supposedly better than McDonald's, so I couldn't complain. When we arrived, the place was full of families and children running around. My mom found a table in the corner while my dad went to the counter to place our order. While I was waiting for our food to be brought out, I kept looking at the toys that came with the combos and was disappointed to see that they didn't have the one I wanted. So I asked my dad to order it anyway, but unfortunately we were out of luck. My dad told me I should be grateful and make do with what there was, which I normally would have done, but I had heard something interesting. The brother of a friend of mine worked at a McDonald's, and he told us that sometimes they had extra toys in storage. They just didn't bother to go and get them. So I foolishly thought that this restaurant might be doing the same thing. While we were waiting, I started to look around to see if I could find a way into the storeroom. I knew it had to be somewhere, and just then I noticed something strange on the wall near our table. There was a small door hidden behind a metal plate that looked like a maintenance access. Nobody else seemed to have noticed it, but I couldn't stop looking at it. I looked back at my parents and realized that they were chatting and checking their phones, so I decided to approach. And when I touched the panel, I noticed that it wasn't really closed. It was as if someone had forgotten to close it. Out of curiosity, I gently pushed the door and it opened with a silent click. But what I saw was not at all what I expected. That little door led to a cold and dark corridor. I knew I shouldn't go in, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had to see where they kept all those toys, so I entered silently. But the first thing I noticed was that the air had a strange smell of raw meat and something chemical. At the end of the corridor, there was another door. This time it was bigger and made of stainless steel. It had no handle, but I pushed the door, and to my surprise, it opened easily. On the other side, I came across a huge industrial kitchen that was completely different to the one I could see from the counter. There were tables and shelves full of sharp knives, and in the center, a huge freezer that was open. I then leaned in to take a look, but I definitely regret having done so. Inside that huge refrigerator, there were a couple of whole horses, completely skinned from head to toe. The animals' eyes were open, with a vacant expression, and their bodies were covered in frost, and then I noticed that one of them was missing a whole leg. My heart started beating like crazy, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, and a man entered through a side door with a huge sword in his hand. He went straight to the freezer and inspected it. Then I saw him cut off the horse's other leg, as if it were a simple cut of normal meat. That was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen up to that age. I felt short of breath and, without meaning to, let out a small scream. The sound echoed around the room and the man turned sharply. His eyes met mine, and suddenly his expression became furious. He was a big guy, wearing a blood-stained apron, and he grabbed my arm so hard that I let out a cry of pain. "What are you doing here, boy?" he asked me angrily. I tried to stammer an excuse, but I couldn't get a word out. At that moment, the man put the sword down on the table near the refrigerator and lunged at me with uncontrolled fury. "You shouldn't have seen this," he said, before picking me up like a doll and throwing me on the cold table. I couldn't move, and fear paralyzed me. At that moment, another man ran into the room, and his eyes widened when he saw me. "What's this?" he asked the other man, alarmed. Then the man who had me by the arm answered that he had come in to snoop around, as he took the sword and brought it closer to my face. For a moment, I noticed him wink at his companion, Although I didn't know what that meant, I was just too terrified. "What if we cook him instead of the horse?" he said, sending an icy chill through my body. I tried to move, but his grip was too strong. "He's just a kid, Ted. He doesn't know much," said the other. "That doesn't matter. He's a nosy kid and I want to eat him," replied the one with the sword, leaning towards me with the blade approaching my face. In that moment, I was convinced that I wasn't going to get out of this alive. I was very sure that they were going to tear me to pieces and turn me into a hamburger, just like that poor frozen horse. "You're being too hard on yourself, Ted. Give it a chance, just this once," said the other guy. Then he turned to me and added, "Listen, kid, if you tell anyone what you saw here, we'll come to your house and make mincemeat of you and your whole family. But if you keep this little secret, everything will be fine. Understand?" At that moment, my eyes filled with tears, and I nodded frantically, even though I knew I was in a horrible situation. I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe. I was dying to scream, but I knew that would only make things worse. Then this Ted guy laughed mockingly and pushed me to the ground. "Get out of here and remember what we said," said Ted, gesturing towards the door with his sword in his hand, and I didn't waste a second. I ran as fast as I could, heading back to where my parents were, not daring to look back. My legs were shaking so much that I almost fell. When I finally got to the table, I let it all out at once. I told my parents everything that had happened, but my dad just frowned and my mom rolled her eyes. "Stop fooling around, Ralph. Today is a big day for your dad," she said. "It's not funny, Palf. If it's about the toy, I'll get you another one," Dad said. I tried to insist, but an employee who was cleaning nearby laughed. "You have a lot of imagination, kid. Maybe you should write a book." I saw his face and noticed that he had an angry look on it. He knew I was telling the truth, and his threatening look told me to keep quiet. I couldn't believe it. I was shaking, with tears running down my face, but my parents completely ignored me. Instead, my mom scolded me for making a scene, and my dad asked me to calm down, but I couldn't, not after what I had seen. As they were eating, I looked up and saw the same mocking employee looking at me from the counter. His face was cold, and suddenly he put a finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. My heart raced. I couldn't sit still. I knew I had to do something to make my parents believe me. So without thinking, I got up and ran to the door leading to the kitchen. My mom shouted my name, but I didn't care. I had to show them what I had seen and prove to them that I wasn't a liar. But when I got there, the door was closed. I started knocking with all my might, but no one opened the door. Finally, an employee opened it from the inside, looking at me curiously. He was an older man with a friendly smile. "What's wrong, kid? Are you lost or something?" The kitchen looked normal, clean and organized, like any restaurant. At that moment, I realized that they had set it all up. They were expecting me to do this. My parents arrived right behind me, apologizing to the man. I tried to explain, but the kitchen was perfect. The cooks I saw earlier had disappeared, as had the refrigerator. It was as if nothing had happened. As we left the restaurant, my parents were still scolding me in the car. My mom said I was grounded, and my dad threatened to take away my bike. They didn't care that I was crying. They don't understand, I thought. As I looked out the car window, I saw two men leaning out of the restaurant. One of them was Ted and the other was his partner. They both stared at us, and Ted smiled at me, raising his hand and waving. Then I sank back in my seat with a sick feeling in my stomach. Later on, I understood that they didn't really want to hurt me. They just wanted to scare me so that I wouldn't say anything. And if I did talk, I would tell such an implausible story that no one would believe me. And that's how it was. To this day, my parents still believe that it was all a figment of my childhood imagination. I finally stopped trying to convince them that it was true, but from that day on, I never wanted to eat hamburgers again. To this day, I hate them. That burger restaurant continued to operate for several years until it closed in 1995. I am completely sure that none of the diners ever found out that what they were serving there was horse meat, and there is no way to prove it now. When I was 19, I worked in a pizzeria in Texas where the atmosphere was so hostile and chaotic that I had to go to therapy after leaving. To understand better, it is important to clarify that most of the employees there, if not all, were undocumented immigrants, which means that we had no rights. It all started when the old boss, whom we'll call Tom, was fired. The truth is, Tom was a great guy. He let us relax, and although sometimes customers complained that we took too long, most of them left happy because they knew that our dishes were made with passion. The problem started when the management, trying to make the work more efficient, decided to look for someone new instead of choosing one of us as boss. That's how Liz came to be, and she turned out to be the beginning of our nightmare. She was a time maniac, always carrying a bunch of watches, and she never stopped rushing us. Management loved her because she had supposedly worked wonders in other restaurants, but she made our lives hell. From day one, Liz didn't give us a second's respite. When a customer arrived, we had to be ready instantly, and she didn't care if we were preparing food. She wanted everything to be done in advance and in an automated way. It was so suffocating that every time we saw a customer coming in, we got chills, and if any of us relaxed, she would appear like lightning, screaming furiously. It was impossible to escape her gaze. At first, we thought she was just trying to make a good impression and that she would soon calm down. But the days went by and she only became more and more intense. She started timing us on everything and kept putting us under pressure. We made jokes about her madness at the end of the shift, but the truth is that nobody dared to say anything to her. And not just because she was our boss, but because she was terrifying. Her presence was awe-inspiring, and she looked at us with so many eyes that we felt any comment could cost us our jobs. The rules she imposed were absurd. Once a week, she made us prepare the orders with her by our side, and for every second we went over the time limit she had set, she deducted from our salary. As the stress increased, several colleagues decided to resign, but here's the disturbing part. Every time someone left the job, Liz went completely crazy. You couldn't even make eye contact with her, or her fury would be unleashed. The next day, she would arrive with a strange, sinister energy. We tried to find out what happened to those who left, but it seemed as if they just vanished. Nobody, not even their families, knew anything about them, and although we had no proof, we suspected that Liz was behind it. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the pressure was mounting. I remember that on one occasion, one of our colleagues managed to do the work in record time, but that only unleashed more fury on those of us who couldn't reach that mark. At first, people were happy because the food came out quickly, but then the complaints started. We were so eager to prepare everything fast that we often forgot ingredients or did things wrong, and when that happened, Liz would wait patiently until after the shift to unleash her anger. The atmosphere in the restaurant became increasingly tense. One day, a guy in the kitchen made a mistake and put bacon instead of salami on a pizza, and the customer complained. Then something completely terrifying happened. When Liz arrived, she screamed at him with a madness we had never seen before. And not only that, she started throwing the trays against the wall in a fit of rage. As the hours went by, the frustration grew. We were all talking to each other about how crazy the job was, but we also knew we had to be careful. Nobody was willing to take the risk. At that point, we were all stressed out. How long would this madness last? The question was always in the air, but we were all afraid to find out. It was a nightmare, because anyone who decided to resign didn't seem to be just leaving a job. They were leaving life, or so it seemed. So we clung to our jobs, praying that one day everything would return to normal. I remember the scariest day of all. Liz joined us outside at the end of the shift and told us that this was going to be her last big test. We all smiled, thinking that if we did everything right, we might never see her again after that night, so we would put up with anything. But no one imagined what she had really planned. Suddenly, the madwoman took out a revolver and pointed it at all of us. We were paralyzed, raising our hands, palms sweating. "Listen, I can't leave any incompetent employees after my last day, so get ready," she said. "My shift ends at 9 p.m. You have 15 minutes to get all the orders out. Anyone who takes more than 2 minutes, boom, you're fired." And she started pointing at us one by one. Every time someone took too long, Liz would scream and insult the person. At first, we all managed to make the pizzas in less than that time, which was already completely crazy. But before it was my turn, one of my colleagues took a second too long. He didn't have time to apologize. Liz pulled the trigger without thinking, and in a second, the noise echoed throughout the place and blood splattered all over us. We were all speechless, in shock. In that moment, we realized that his madness was real, and that all our suspicions were true. At first, we thought that he was speaking figuratively when he said he would shoot anyone who failed, and that the gun was just to put more pressure on us. But we never imagined that this madman would really kill us if we failed. Instead of cleaning up the mess, he made us continue working, while my colleague's body lay just to one side. The seasonings were covered in blood, and although that was horrible, it mattered much more that we continued to make pizzas, no matter how, because if any of us made a mistake, we would surely be the next in line. Looking back at that moment, we should have rebelled, but who could blame us? We were just a group of terrified teenagers who just wanted to go home. From that moment on, we all began to work at an accelerated pace, knowing that our lives depended on it, while Liz evaluated us one by one. I remember Marta, an Ecuadorian classmate who couldn't stop crying, completely terrified. Unfortunately, she was the next to fail, and Liz didn't hesitate to shoot her. I almost fainted. She was right next to me and her blood splattered on my clothes and face. When it was my turn, Liz stood right next to me and started the stopwatch. As I prepared the pizza, my legs and hands were shaking, so I was being clumsy. Then she angrily came up to me and grabbed me by the hair, pushing my head against the blood-covered surface. "Is that why you can't move? Get used to it, because if you do it wrong, your head will be here too. Do you understand me?" Gathering all my energy, I was finally able to answer, "Yes, ma'am." And I started to make the double cheese pepperoni pizza she ordered. I couldn't concentrate. I just wanted to cry and go home. But Liz's gun was still pressed against my head, and her gaze showed no mercy. When I finally finished, she stopped the timer, and smiling as if she were enjoying the show, she said, 1 minute, 58 seconds. You did well." Then she looked at the clock and said, "It's 9 p.m. It has been a pleasure working with you guys. I know I am leaving an excellent team." And after saying this, she put the gun to her own head and pulled the trigger. She fell instantly. No one could believe what we had just witnessed. We were all terrified in complete shock. After that night, I never went back to that restaurant. I didn't even go to get my pay, nothing. The worst part was that the news never came out, or at least not as it really was. The only thing that came out was that the supervisor of the well-known restaurant had taken her own life at home, in the middle of a depressive crisis. My colleagues were never mentioned, nor anything that happened. And in the end, who cared? We were literally nobodies. So those deaths didn't exist, and neither did what really happened. Today, I live in the country with legal status, and I have a decent job. But after that experience, I suffered panic attacks for years, and it took a lot of therapy to overcome that trauma. But the terror of that night, the bloodied bodies of my friends, the smell of blood, has never been erased from my memory, and I don't think I will ever forget that horror. To tell you this story, I must explain the context from the beginning. I had just turned 16, and to celebrate this very important birthday, I traveled to Toronto with my two best friends, Lily and Mia, my parents and my younger brother. We rented a hotel for the weekend and had a good time swimming in the pool and then went shopping. Everything was great up to that point. But here comes the scary part. That night, after returning from the mall, we got to our hotel room, took showers, and, at around 11, we started to get a bit bored. So I knocked on the door between my room and my friends' and my parents' room to ask if we could go for a walk around Toronto, as we had nothing to do. My mom said yes, so when we were about to leave, my little brother joined us because he was bored too. In the end, my parents decided to come too to look after him. So there we were, walking through the streets of Toronto and enjoying the atmosphere of the city. My parents and my brother were a little bit ahead, while Lily, Mia, and I lagged behind, laughing and chatting. After a while, I started to get hungry, so I told my parents we wanted to get something to eat. It was my birthday, so they weren't going to say no. They walked with us until we found this huge 2-story building full of restaurants and fast food outlets. In the center, there was a big escalator that led to the second floor. There weren't many people there, but the few people who were there seemed a little weird. The truth is that we didn't see any place to eat on that first floor, so we decided to take the escalator up to the second. My parents went straight to a McDonald's that we saw as soon as we got off the escalator, and sat at a table far away. Lily wasn't very hungry, so she went to look for a table for us, while Mia and I decided to buy an ice cream. While we were waiting, we noticed a group of 3 boys sitting near the ice cream shop. I noticed that they were looking at us and whispering to each other, and then 2 of them came up behind us to get in line. It was a bit weird, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Suddenly, one of them, who looked really strange, started talking to Mia. This guy was tall and looked Jamaican. He tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I've never been here before. What flavor of ice cream do you recommend?" I felt a little uncomfortable, to be honest, because the guy looked creepy. He was a grown man who looked to be about 30, with a strange air and an even stranger attitude. Plus, he was playing with the lid of a small, dark bottle while talking to her. Mia, who is super friendly, didn't think much of it and continued chatting with him. That was when the other guy from her group approached me. This guy gave me a bad vibe from the start, so I tried to avoid him as much as I could. He was also a very tall Jamaican man, and he was wearing a white raincoat and hat. He approached me saying, "Wow, you look exotic. What is your ethnicity?" I was taken aback by his question. It sounded too strange to me, so I just laughed nervously and told him where I was from. I didn't want to be rude. "I'm from Lunenburg, but I have Asian and Latin American heritage on my parents' side. Why?" He said to me, "Wow, that's a really beautiful mix. You're very pretty. Can I have your number?" Obviously, I said no. However, the guy insisted, saying that he only wanted to talk to me via text messages. I was adamant and repeated that I wouldn't give my number to strangers. I thought his behavior was highly inappropriate, especially since he was a grown man, and I was barely a teenager. Besides, who asks a complete stranger for their phone number? But as he continued to try to convince me, I noticed that the third guy in his group, who had been watching from the table, got up. He was another tall Jamaican guy, dressed very elegantly, with a briefcase in his hand. The guy made eye contact with me before going down the escalator to the first floor. The whole situation was freaking me out, and I was ready to leave, when suddenly the man who had been talking to Mia approached me again and said, "Oh, I have your friend on Snapchat and I was wondering if I could get yours too." I told him that I didn't give my Snapchat to strangers either, but he laughed and replied, "Okay, but I need to know, are you two here alone or are your parents nearby?" To be honest, I didn't know what to say. In my innocence, I didn't understand why he was asking me that, so my mind went blank and I felt petrified. But just at that moment, Mia decided to speak for me. "My parents are at McDonald's and our other friend Lily is at a table nearby." The boys looked at Lily and waved at her, and she, who had been watching us, realized that we were uncomfortable and was preparing to come over and get us out of that situation. At that moment, my parents approached Lily and told her that they were going back to the hotel room, and since the place was only a few minutes' walk away, my mom thought we would be okay. Lily nodded, so my parents and my brother headed for the escalator. Then she came over to us and the strange guys. "Hey, is everything okay here?" she asked. The guy in the white raincoat looked at me and said, "Oh sure, bye beautiful." I didn't even look at him directly. Lily, Mia, and I looked at each other and decided it was time to leave. I didn't want to stay there another minute, so we started walking towards the escalator. But to my horror, I saw that those same boys were following us. At that moment, I started to get nervous. My parents had already left, so we were alone, and there were 3 of us, 16-year-old girls in an almost empty building at that time of night in a city we didn't know. I told Mia that those 2 guys were following us, and when she found out, she also got worried. We went down the escalator, and they did the same. At that moment, there were only 2 other people on that escalator separating us from those terrifying men, and when we finally reached the bottom, I saw my parents and my brother queuing at Starbucks. It was like a huge relief, so we ran towards them to tell them what was happening. But just as I was telling my mom, I noticed that the men realized we were still within reach. So, as soon as they came down too, they decided to go back up to the 2nd floor. My mom told me that they had already gone back up to the 2nd floor and that we should go to the room. At that moment, the 3 of us nodded, still very nervous. Then my parents and my brother left the building first, and we followed them. When we came out, I realized that the same guy with the briefcase, who I thought had left, was standing right next to the exit, staring at us. Cold sweat ran down my back when I saw him. He stared at us intensely as we walked past him. I assumed he didn't attack us because my parents were there, but as we walked away, I glanced back to make sure he wasn't following us. And there I saw him approach a black car, very dark and with tinted windows. He crouched down to knock on the window, and the guy in the driver's seat rolled it down a little. The man with the briefcase whispered something to him, and then he walked away from the car, returning to the building we had come from. At that moment, my heart was beating very fast. I knew that those men didn't have good intentions, and I just wanted to get away from them as soon as possible. My parents were there, and I didn't know what could have happened to us if they weren't there. The thought of it terrified me. I couldn't even imagine what those men wanted from us or why the guy with the briefcase had approached that vehicle, but I didn't want to think about it. Finally, we returned to our rooms, and when we arrived, Mia burst into tears when she realized what had really happened, while Lily and I tried to calm her down. Then I asked her if she really gave her number and social media accounts to those guys. "Yes," she replied, and my stomach sank. But what she said next left me even more terrified. She confessed that she had also given him my Snapchat, because he had asked her to, and she was afraid to say no. It was at that moment that she realized that she had her location activated, and we all panicked. I told Mia to turn it off immediately, but when she tried, we saw that one of the guys appeared on her Bitmoji right next to his, which meant that he was in our hotel or very close to it. She turned off his location and blocked him that instant. That night we couldn't sleep, and we didn't dare to stick our noses out of our room. Fortunately, nothing else happened, thank God. The next day, I told my parents that I wanted to go home, even though we had the whole day paid for. But I was really scared and didn't feel safe. I had the feeling that those guys were nearby, maybe stalking the hotel, so I couldn't enjoy anything. Fortunately, they understood and agreed, so we immediately packed our things and went home. I'm glad they hadn't left the building before all this happened, because I don't want to imagine what could have happened to us alone. It was my first year of high school, and winter was coming to an end. That night, the air was cool but not freezing, and my lifelong friend, whom we'll call Lila, sent me a message asking what I was doing and saying she was hungry. I was at my cousin's house, which was about 8 blocks from where Lila lived, and about a mile from a McDonald's. Right across the street from the McDonald's was a Target and other fast food chains, and a mile and a half away was a Burger King. I don't know who came up with the bright idea of sneaking out at 11:30 at night to satisfy our appetites, but there we were. I had never done anything like that before, and to be honest, sneaking out was quite easy for me, and Lila, well, let's just say she was used to it. I arrived a little late, so she was already at the meeting point wearing jeans and a blue sweatshirt, while I was in my pajamas, with shorts and a soccer jersey that was way too big for me. Looking back, it wasn't the best choice of clothing for a midnight stroll in a cold and not very safe city. We met on the corner and started walking towards McDonald's, catching up on the boys we liked and laughing about a science teacher we had. The streets weren't empty, but there weren't a lot of cars either. I was just worried my mom would see me wandering around, so we decided to cross the Target parking lot to save a few steps. Of course, McDonald's and Target were a bit uphill, but that didn't affect us because we were coming from the opposite direction. When we crossed from Target to McDonald's, I saw a guy who looked to be about 6 feet tall. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt and shorts. Lila was about 5'2", and I was around 5'3" or 5'4". I didn't really think too much about the guy because we were too busy laughing and chatting, although he did catch my attention at first, and I kept the image in my mind. Being the geniuses that we were, it didn't occur to us to check if the McDonald's was open, and it turns out that it was, but only for drive-through service. Well, another failure in our mission to have dinner, but we didn't give up because Burger King wasn't that far away, so we decided to head there. As we walked, I went ahead and Lila kept looking back. She always does that when we go anywhere, day or night. She's a bit paranoid because she grew up in a dangerous suburb where robberies and assaults were very common. At one point, she linked her arm with mine and whispered that the guy in the sweatshirt we had seen a few blocks back was following us. That immediately put me on alert, and I discreetly looked back to check, and there he was just a few meters away from us. So Lila started walking faster, and I told her not to rush so much, because if the guy realized we were nervous, things could get complicated. As I said, our city wasn't the safest, so I had learned to be aware of my surroundings since I was little. I wasn't the brightest in the family, but I wasn't stupid either. So there we were, in the middle of the night, walking fast while the suspicious guy followed us. My stomach was in a knot, thinking that at some point the guy would launch an attack. What were we going to do if that happened? We simply didn't have a plan, so I just prayed that it wouldn't happen. We continued to move towards the Burger King, but our unease grew. Lila kept looking back every so often, and the fact that the guy was still there made me more and more nervous. However, I decided not to let fear stop us. We were on a night mission after all, and I wasn't going to ruin that for a stranger. The adrenaline was pumping, and although it sounded a bit scary, deep down it was also exciting. Maybe a little risk would add to the excitement of our night. Who knows? What was clear was that we wouldn't stop until we reached that Burger King. I told Lila that we should cross the street and go into Target, which was on the other side. She nodded, and as we did so, I glanced back and saw that the guy was crossing too. By this point, our nerves were already through the roof, but while Lila was on the verge of a panic attack, for some reason I was laughing at the situation. It was like, what were the odds that I would run away for the first time and end up being chased right after leaving McDonald's? I didn't know if it was the nerves or how crazy the situation was. But anyway, I wanted to live the whole experience of the first nighttime getaway, so I kept laughing as we crossed the huge Target parking lot. I decided to FaceTime my cousin to tell her what was happening. I knew I was running away, and I told her that Lila was in total panic mode. Just as I was in the middle of the story, I cut the call because Lila and I decided to run towards the entrance of Target. The guy was still behind us, and once inside, we decided to walk around a bit, just in case he was following us inside the store. But fortunately, he didn't come in, so we sat down by the glass windows to assess the situation. However, Lila told me that she had seen the guy go through the inside of Target, right in the direction we had come from. I decided to call my older brother for advice, and he told me to call my cousin and tell her to come get us. But instead of calling her, I sent her a text asking her to bring her boyfriend, who was a huge, muscular guy who would intimidate anyone. She replied that he would meet us in the entrance, and I agreed. Lila seemed relieved, but I still felt a little unconcerned. A few minutes passed, and a guy walked into Target and approached us. I don't remember exactly what he looked like, but I think he was Caucasian and about 5'7". He told us that he was at the drive-thru at McDonald's when he saw us walk away and noticed the guy following us. He said he saw us cross over to Target and wanted to make sure we were okay, so we told him our side of the story and said we were actually safe. He nodded, but warned us that we shouldn't be out so late, and that we really should call our families to come and get us. We told him that our family was already on their way and thanked him for his concern. Hearing someone else talk about what had happened made it feel more real. In the end, my cousin arrived with her boyfriend and her dad in the car, so yes, we were arrested in a way, but I didn't get in trouble because, well, they were my cousins, and that helped a little. Besides, I knew my mom would have been furious with them for not realizing that I had run away on her watch. Lila came to my cousin's house with me, and we started talking about what had happened. I even FaceTimed one of our older friends to tell her the story. Lila and I, for reasons that have nothing to do with that night, stopped talking years later, but we always remembered that event and laughed about what happened. However, it was terrifying to think how easy it could have been for something bad to happen if we had continued on our way to Burger King. The fact that someone else had witnessed everything made the situation feel all too real for me. After that, I was followed a couple more times, and I learned not to take safety lightly. So yes, I think it's safe to say that I won't be going out alone at those hours anymore. To be honest, I never wanted things to get so ugly. I just wanted a quiet break with my friends. But who could have imagined that it would take such a dark turn? It was the first day of vacation of my freshman year at Brown, and honestly, I wished I had stayed at the dorm, but my mom wouldn't leave me alone, insisting that I come home. Since moving to Rhode Island, I had been avoiding that trip back to Iowa, and I didn't want to deal with my screaming brothers or my mother's constant complaining. I can't say I'm a big fan of my father either, because I lost touch with him over 10 years ago, and I don't even know how he's been, even though my mom has done all the heavy lifting since he disappeared. The point is, it wasn't the best time to go home. I know I was a bit selfish asking my best friends Will and Blair to come with me. They live abroad and were planning to stay at university, so I wasn't sure they'd want to make the trip. But to my surprise, Blair was excited about meeting my family, while Will just wanted to know if I had any hot sisters, typical Will. The trio that we formed had become strong by doing silly things together, from jumping off cliffs to parachuting, so we decided to embark on the adventure again. We set off on our journey from Rhode Island to Iowa, and of course we stopped at all the places Blair could think of to take photos and see state signs. We had to make stops at several gas stations and everything seemed perfect until we got to Pennsylvania. My truck is one of those old ones that give problems from time to time. Sometimes it gets hot and won't start, but nothing I couldn't handle. That day, a dark sedan pulled up next to my truck, and a guy inside asked us if we had any money for gas. Obviously, we're broke students in debt up to our ears, so we said no, but I noticed that the guy gave Blair a fleeting look before driving away. That doesn't look good, I thought, but Will just joked that it was probably nothing, so we carried on. Hours later, we were about to cross from Ohio into Indiana when Blair shouted, "I need a bathroom now. There haven't been any gas stations for miles." I was so focused on driving that I hardly paid any attention to him, so he said, "I'll pee in a bush and that's that," making Will make a joke about how it would make a nice view for the drivers. Soon after, I saw a strange house and decided to stop. There, Blair jumped out of the car and went through the door without me being able to open my mouth. "Isn't it a weird place to take a leak?" Will asked. "Sure, but he just needs to take a piss, and then we'll be on our way." "We still have a long way to go," I replied. But at that moment, I saw the dark green sedan from before appear. The same guy got out and came over to us. Will and I looked at each other and a strange feeling ran through me. And just as I was about to tell Will to find Blair and leave, the man drew a gun. We both froze. But just then we saw Blair peeking out of the house, and when she saw the scene, she went back inside. The guy asked us about her and told us to give him everything we had, but just then I saw Blair approaching with a good-sized piece of wood over the guy's shoulder. And before he could react, she hit him over the head with it and the guy fell, dazed. He was out of the fight after Will kicked him in the face. When he fell unconscious, we took the gun from him and threw it as far as we could into the undergrowth. I shouted at Will and Blair to get in the car, and when we were all in, I started the car and put my foot down without looking back. "Dude, look at your arm," exclaimed Will at that moment, and when I looked, I saw my t-shirt soaked in blood. "I'm fine. We just have to get away from this madman," I replied. How could he have found us? We left him behind in another state, I wondered, trying to rationalize what had happened. At that moment, the check engine light started flashing and we all immediately tensed up. "It's going to be okay. There's no way he can catch us," I told him, although I didn't feel so sure. It was then that we saw a McDonald's in the distance, which was like a light of hope. But as we approached, I realized that its lights were off. I decided it was time to take a look at the problem with my engine light and told Will and Blair to stay in the car just in case. Then I went outside, opened the hood, and immediately a hot steam shot out. I'm no mechanical genius, but I know that doesn't bode well. Under the circumstances, I took out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Great, I thought, and went back to the car. I asked the guys if they had a signal, but nothing. So there we were, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a broken-down car and a psycho on our tail. In the end, we decided to go into the McDonald's we had in front of us, hoping to find some food and some peace and quiet, but we soon realized that the place was more desolate than a ghost town. The tables were overturned, the windows were covered in some kind of filth, the floor was stained and the chairs were in shreds. That place smelled of death. Blair started looking for a first aid kit even though I told her it was okay, but she didn't listen and went to the kitchen. I tried to stay calm, but something in the air told me that nothing was going to be okay. Suddenly, we heard a heart-rending scream coming from the front of the restaurant and Will appeared running, illuminated by the headlights of our car. But it was only a matter of seconds before we saw the guy from the sedan, now with a knife running after him. And before I could do anything, he stabbed Will several times in the back, knocking him to the ground badly wounded. My blood ran cold. "No!" I screamed as Blair and I backed away in terror. The guy started to laugh smugly as my friend lay dying on the floor. "Who's next?" he asked mockingly. "Come on, quick," I whispered to Blair, and we ran to the kitchen, hiding behind a bar. While she was sobbing, I tried to calm her down, covering her mouth so she wouldn't make any noise. But just then, a sharp sound cut through the air, that of a knife on metal. He was almost on top of us. The guy's footsteps were getting closer and my heart was beating fast, but then I heard a strange noise, and the guy started screaming while you could hear banging and things falling. There was someone else, Will, maybe? Was he alive? I jumped out of my hiding place, and when I looked where everything was happening, I realized that the madman was fighting with someone. There was a man struggling with him to take the knife away, but I had no idea who he was or where he had come from. All I knew was that I had to help him neutralize that psychopath, so I did. I jumped on him, and between the two of us, we managed to take the knife and beat him up. Then we tied his hands and feet with his own clothes. The guy who helped us turned out to be a farmer from a nearby village who had gotten drunk and set out to sleep in the abandoned McDonald's. He saw everything from the beginning, and when he saw that the man stabbed my friend and tried to do the same to Blair and me, he decided to intervene, and thank God he did, because I don't know what would have become of us if he hadn't stopped him. After gagging the guy, I ran to the entrance to try to help Will. But unfortunately, there was nothing I could do for him. He was dead. In the end, we walked with the man to the village, and from there we called the police and a tow truck. After the event, the guy who followed us was arrested. Blair decided to return to the city, and I drove home to be with my parents. Now more than ever, I needed them. Will's death is something that haunts me to this day. I can't help feeling guilty for having invited him on that trip that would cost him his life.